Coming this fall to HGTV, the biggest home makeover in American history. This fall, Donald Trump is taking open concept living to a whole new level.
In order to do it properly, we had to take down the existing structure.
From the producers of Flip or Flop, it's Flip or Flop Pennsylvania Avenue, where every episode ends with gold lame shiplap and an Anti-Deficiency Act violation.
We added a lot of 24-karat gold, and it's very expensive.
Coming this fall on HGTV. In just 3 days with no warning, Donald Trump demolished the entire East Wing of the White House to make way for his Louis XIV-inspired ballroom. His brand new state ballroom will be a, quote, cavernous event space big enough to host 999 of his closest friends. The price tag on this monstrosity was around $200 to $250 million when I started recording this video. By the time I edited it, the cost had gone up to at least $300 million.
Donating
Actually,
to this construction
I think
project.
$350 million.
Sorry, make that $350 million with no end in sight. All the while, the government is shut down and SNAP food payments are about to go unpaid. But don't worry about the money, guys. A BS $24 million settlement from YouTube over Trump's 2021 suspension from the platform is being routed, at least in part, through a public trust to help fund the ballroom. That doesn't seem right, but only $325 million left to raise. And that's why Trump is asking Pam Bondi to just cut him a check. Problem solved. Now, Trump previously promised that this renovation wouldn't touch the East Wing at all.
It won't interfere with the current building. It'll be near it, but not touching it, and pays total respect to the existing building, which I'm the biggest fan of. It's my favorite.
Just kidding. Now the entire building is gone.
It was never thought of as being much. It was a very small building.
And of course, the construction project is happening, and if physically demolishing the White House and leaving a giant gash on the side wasn't metaphorical enough, the construction project is happening at the same time as the longest government shutdown in American history. Federal employees aren't getting paid, millions of people are about to lose their SNAP benefits, their insurance premiums are set to skyrocket, and the military has been deployed to several cities under dubious legal rationale. But don't worry about your federal benefits, Trump has his eye on the ball. Now, this might not be the worst legal offense, but there is something haunting about seeing the White House torn apart while the government grinds to a halt. But buckle up, we've got some explaining to do. Like, how? And why? But most importantly, there's no money to do any of this. Now, as you might have learned in history class, the White House was built between 1792 and 1800. It was constructed largely by enslaved laborers who quarried the stone, hauled it, and raised its walls. And most of the historical events Americans are familiar with took place in the West Wing. The East Wing was built much later, in 1902, with a second story added in 1942. FDR added a presidential bunker, today called the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, which is beneath the East Wing and the East Colonnade. And White House tours used to start with the East Facade, giving visitors a view of the Jacqueline Kennedy Gardens on the left. The East Wing housed a movie theater, the First Lady's offices, and parts of the facade facing the Treasury. And apparently staffers from the First Lady's offices and other functions within the East Wing are being relocated during construction. Though interestingly, Melania has disavowed any knowledge or involvement in this particular project. Well, that's because apparently Trump really wants a big event space. The ballroom is projected to be about 90,000 square feet, which, if true, and we'll come back to that, would nearly double the footprint of the main White House building. And it's supposed to seat up to 999 people. Though so far we've only seen a couple of contradictory elevations and renderings of what's supposed to be built there. As far as we can tell, there are no real plans for the construction of this thing. And originally Trump promised that the renovation wouldn't touch the East Wing at all.
Near it, but not touching it.
But demolition of the facade of the East Wing of the White House began on October 20th, 2025, with heavy machinery ripping through part of the structure. Now, earlier this summer, the White House released a statement promising that the new ballroom would be, quote, ornately designed, and that, quote, its theme and architectural heritage would be almost identical to the original design. Here's the East Wing entrance, which definitely no longer looks like this because the entire building is gone. The White House was characteristically opaque when discussing how and why the plans changed. According to spokesperson Caroline Levitt, quote, the plans changed when the president heard counsel from the architects and the construction companies who said that in order for this East Wing to be modern and beautiful for many, many years to come, for it to be a truly strong and stable structure, this phase one that we're now in was necessary. But that's a reminder that now is probably a good time to wipe all your personal and private information off the internet. Your cell phone number, home address, email address, private social media accounts, and tons of sensitive data are shockingly easy to purchase by anybody online. But you can fight back and take control of your private information by signing up for today's sponsor, Incogni. Because Incogni wipes your personal data from the internet by searching the internet, reaching out to data brokers and websites directly on your behalf, and forcing them to remove your private information online. If they resist, Incogni will take care of that too, because Incogni fights back. But what makes Incogni truly powerful in taking back control of your privacy is the custom removals feature. It allows you to flag an unlimited number of sites where your data is exposed, and you can even have Incogni's privacy experts review and tackle the most uncooperative data brokers and people's search sites. Now, I've been using Incogni for a while now, and in that time you can see I've been on hundreds of lists, some of which had a high sensitivity score, meaning the broker had tons of data on me. Luckily, Incogni has completed hundreds of takedowns for me over the years, and I could never do this myself. So thank you to Incogni for saving me weeks worth of work and adding me to over 40 suppression lists. And Incogni will continue to conduct ongoing removals because even if the broker removes your data once, they can always collect it and publish it again. So if online privacy is important to you, give Incogni a try. If you scan the code on screen or click on the link in the description, you'll get 60% off their unlimited annual plan. Or try Incogni risk-free for 30 days. If you decide you want to keep it, you'll still get the 60% off discount so long as you use my code LegalEagle, all one word, at checkout. So sign up for Incogni or I'll see you in court. But let's start with the basics. Who owns the White House? Well, definitely not the president. The National Park Service is the steward for the White House for the American people. The White House and its grounds are part of the President's Park. According to the NPS, the grounds are, quote, a site for protests and national discourse about what it means to be American. Now that matters because when the White House is altered, we're not talking about remodeling the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas, which was recently named the 10th ugliest building in the world. This is a major federal undertaking on a nationally significant site. Now you might think that there are some laws that apply to this situation, and they do, but there's no law that says the president can't do construction. For starters, presidents are allowed to redecorate the private living quarters and the Oval Office. They can change the artwork, get new carpet, remove the drapes, or paint the walls. Congress has in fact allocated funds so an incoming president can buy new furnishings and maintain the home in accordance with their personal taste. The key there is that Congress has allocated those funds. But for President Obama, that meant putting a basketball hoop on the tennis court and planting an herb garden. For Trump, first it meant paving over the Rose Garden so it looked like an Orlando La Quinta, installing giant flagpoles, and adding golden tchotchkes to every surface in the White House. And Trump expanded on his interior design philosophy in a conversation with Laura Ingraham.
You've never been able to match gold with gold paint. That's why it's gold.
Noted. Now, over the last 9 months, the White House has steadily added more gaudy accoutrements and gold leaf to his favorite rooms. You can check out the before and after pictures of the Oval Office, for instance. But the point is, if the president wants to hang tacky gold frames on the wall and doesn't understand the concept of white space, that's his prerogative. And that's fine. But that doesn't mean the president can raise the White House to the ground and get rid of everything inside, does it? Well, it sort of depends. Let's start with the limits on furnishing and art. In 1961, Congress enacted Public Law 87-286, declaring that the furnishings of the White House were inalienable property of the White House, legislating that the White House's status as a museum, and extending legal protection to donated period furnishings and all White House objects. Which means that Trump can't hold a giant yard sale or give King Charles a sword that had belonged to President Eisenhower. He tried it, though. Trump's effort to give Chuck the sword failed, but the head of the Eisenhower Library was forced to resign because he stood up to Trump. So generally, property stays with the White House. Now, we don't really know what happened to all the things from the East Wing. We can assume and hope that most of the valuable items are in storage, but some of the debris is being dumped into East Potomac Park. But what about the structure itself? Because the White House is a National Historic Landmark, many assumed its renovation would trigger Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. That section requires agencies to consider how projects affect historic properties and give the public and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation a chance to comment. However, Section 107 explicitly exempts the White House, the Supreme Court, and the U.S. Capitol from those requirements, so the usual preservation review doesn't apply to the East Wing. Now, prior administrations have followed the National Preservation Act's processes, even though it wasn't required. But since the law does not mandate a review process, the Trump White House moved forward. Major renovation projects that would change the exterior of a historic building would normally go through the National Capital Planning Commission and the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts for design and planning review, but the law that established the NCPC gives the agency undertaking the renovation full authority to do what it wants if it doesn't agree with the commission's views. It says the agency, quote, shall advise and consult with the commission as the agency prepares plans and programs in preliminary and successive stages that affect the plan and development of the national capital. However, quote, if the agency, after considering the report and recommendations of the commission, does not agree, it shall advise the commission and provide the reasons why it does not agree. The commission then shall submit a final report. After consultation and suitable consideration of the views of the commission, the agency may proceed to take action in accordance with its legal responsibilities and authority. So even if the commission did not agree with the proposed renovations, it couldn't stop them. And this commission is not eager to clash with Trump. Back in September, Will Scharf, the planning commissioner chair, who is also a Trump appointee, said the commission has no jurisdiction over demolition and site preparation. Quote, "What we deal with is essentially construction, vertical build." Scharf said the commission was only required to vet rebuilding, and Scharf is also Trump's White House staff secretary. And we don't know if the White House's original plans included taking out the whole building. That decision might have been made on the fly as the building was being gutted. No one has approved any plans at all, and all we have at this point are just some cartoonish renderings of what the exterior might look like, and even those renderings contradict other renderings that they have created. There are absolutely no real plans for the construction of this thing.
It's, there's a relative, nobody's actually seen anything quite like it. This is a plan, if it's got tables.
But what about the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts? Well, officers have a duty to request advice, but that advice isn't binding. And traditionally, they would have been consulted, but the White House appears to have bypassed the commission entirely. And breaking news, Trump has now fired all 6 members of the Commission of Fine Arts. Wonderful. And the District of Columbia has no formal authority over building projects at the White House. But honestly, the bigger problem is the funding. As we've talked a lot about recently, only Congress has the power of the purse. The executive has no independent appropriations authority. And here, Trump's ballroom project was originally estimated to cost $200 million, but anyone who has ever remodeled a house knows what happens when you start ripping the walls out, the price goes up in one direction. But you've probably heard the White House's defense. Don't worry about the cost, private donors are covering it.
And it's being paid for 100% by me and some friends of mine, donors to it. The government's paying absolutely nothing.
Now, anytime you hear private donors and the federal government, you should probably be hearing some alarm bells. For starters, on October 15th, the president hosted a dinner at the White House attended by representatives from Amazon, Apple, Caterpillar, Coinbase Global, Comcast, Google, Lockheed Martin, Meta, Microsoft, Palantir Technologies, T-Mobile, and several other wealthy Trump supporters. And on October 23rd, the White House released a list of 37 companies and individuals who appeared to have donated to this project. Now, we don't know how much money each of them had pledged, but they were writing some big checks. According to CBS, Lockheed Martin had pledged $10 million toward the project. Google had reportedly donated at least $5 million. Carrier has pledged to cover all of Trump's HVAC needs. And of course, Trump has also promised to contribute $22 million from his YouTube settlement. And according to the White House, they've raised nearly $200 million. And CBS reported that one of Trump's political fundraisers, Meredith O'Rourke, is leading the effort paired with the Trust for the National Mall, a nonprofit that is, quote, dedicated to restoring, preserving, and elevating the National Mall to support the construction of the White House State Ballroom. And the Trust nonprofit status means donations come with a federal tax write-off. And donors have apparently signed pledge agreements that give them the option to pay in a lump sum or spread their contribution over 3 installments to be completed by 2027. And according to CBS, the contracts say that in return for the donations, donors are eligible for, quote, recognition associated with the White House Ballroom. Now, we don't know what that means, but sources have said the donors might have their names etched into brick or stone. Donors can also elect to remain anonymous. And there are just so many legal red flags here. Let's start with using the Trust for the National Mall. Now, to qualify as a 501c3, a nonprofit must be organized and operated exclusively for charitable, educational, or public purposes, and not operate for the private benefit of any individual or political figure. And the Trust for the National Mall works with the National Park Service on a variety of projects. But the ballroom isn't on the National Mall, though. It's a private event space for the president. And if the ballroom functions primarily as a venue for campaign donors, private events, and Trump's personal business projects rather than serving the public, the IRS could deem the donations non-charitable in the next administration, I guess. And the trust might even jeopardize its tax-exempt status. But generally speaking, you can't donate to the federal government and say that those funds have to be used in one specific way. And the executive can't go out raising funds to use as it sees fit. That's the whole point of appropriations from Congress. But in some situations, the National Park Service is permitted to accept private donations. The Washington Monument, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial were partially funded with private money. But there's a big difference between memorials that are free and open to the public and a state ballroom that's part of the White House itself and could theoretically encompass more than half of the square footage of the entire White House. Under 54 U.S.C. 101-101, the Park Service can accept money or property donated, quote, for the benefit of the national park system. That includes President's Park, the grounds that encompass the White House. However, for the donations to be legal, there has to be a written contract between the NPS and the donor. The donor also has to have funds in hand. Now, that rule is intended to prevent NPS from having unfinished projects with continually ballooning costs. So if the East Wing is being leveled before those donations cleared and were accepted by the NPS, the donations might not be legal. The NPS guidelines on private donations say the agency should screen for conflicts of interest, MPS policy prohibits, quote, concessionaires or those seeking a concessions contract or others where the donation would appear to unduly influence the NPS. Presumably the others could include private companies not seeking concessions contracts. It also bans money from, quote, sources that would generate controversy, harm public confidence, or associate the NPS with products that are inconsistent with our mission or require activities that circumvent federal regulations or ethics rules. And, quote, donations involved in litigation with the Department of the Interior or its bureaus. And it would certainly seem that these regulations ban donations from tech companies that just settled a case with the president. It should also ban companies from giving money to projects that are inconsistent with the national park's mission. The ballroom has almost no public utility, and it seems like the Trump ballroom is more like a monument to bribery than a public park. Richard Painter, who served as chief ethics lawyer in the George W. Bush administration, said Trump's fundraising violated federal ethics rules. Duh. And government officials are not allowed to use their government position to, quote, coerce or induce another person to provide any benefit, financial or otherwise. But perhaps most worryingly, ethics and legal experts say that the White House ballroom project may violate the Anti-Deficiency Act, which prohibits federal agencies from accepting voluntary services or outside gifts to supplement funds appropriated by Congress. Now, we talked a lot about the Anti-Deficiency Act in the context of Trump paying the military during the shutdown or just doing projects without a federal appropriation. The act prohibits U.S. federal agencies from spending or obligating government funds in advance of or in excess of appropriations from Congress. And as Painter points out, the White House might argue that it isn't an agency subject to the act, but it applies to officers or employees of the U.S. government, not just agencies. It says, quote, an officer or employee of the United States government may not make or authorize an expenditure or obligation exceeding an amount available in an appropriation or fund for the expenditure or obligation. So if the White House or anyone in the executive office of the president uses appropriated funds or receives outside money or voluntary services, those actions can still trigger the Anti-Deficiency Act, even if the White House itself isn't labeled as an agency. And as Painter noted, quote, in the past, the White House abided by it. We did during the Bush administration. The White House did not have authority to receive gifts. Painter explained that these corporate donors are not just being generous, they aren't building a monument or park that visitors can enjoy. As he put it, quote, the companies making donations for the ballroom construction want something from the government, and they're paying, one, for access to the president and other high-ranking officials, and two, hoping it will buy them what they want. Many, such as Lockheed Martin, want big Defense Department contracts. So now our $1 trillion defense budget will grow even more, and also we can save taxpayers $200 million building a ballroom the White House doesn't need. Finally, the ballroom will be used to entertain big campaign donors by this and future presidents, perpetrating the White House pay-to-play. If Trump uses the ballroom this way, it might violate the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. These clauses bar federal officials from accepting money, gifts, or benefits from foreign states or domestic governments without Congress's consent. Trump may use the ballroom, assuming it ever gets built during his presidency, to host foreign dignitaries, and that would be fine. But what if he hosted a special dinner for top holders of his private shitcoin? Trump just did that earlier this year. That was a brazenly corrupt scheme that gave meme coin holders unprecedented access to the president. The nonpartisan ethics watchdog group Crew called the dinner invitation, quote, as unethical as you can get, essentially selling off access to the president and the White House. There's also a concern that the president is getting money from private sources and using it as a private slush fund. The miscellaneous receipt statute, 31 U.S.C. 3302, says the federal officials who receive money for the government must deposit the funds in the Treasury. They can't just keep and spend outside of appropriation. So generally, if money is for the government, it should be deposited into the Treasury's general fund and spent only if Congress appropriates those funds. Otherwise, what appears to be happening here is that the president and other officials could just create an off-book slush fund and use that fund for whatever they want, regardless of whether Congress had actually appropriated it. And in fact, this is what got Oliver North in trouble during the Iran-Contra scandal. North and his co-conspirators used proceeds from the sale of U.S. weapons to Iran to create a slush fund that could be spent on their own discretion. The co-defendants were eventually charged with theft of government property. And of course, Congress could step in through their oversight and appropriations power, but right now the Republican-controlled Congress has essentially abdicated their role, and of course the government is shut down.
Barack Obama added a basketball court. President Trump's going to add the greatest improvement to the White House in the history of the building since it was originally constructed in 1800. The ballroom is going to be glorious.
But right now, this is an enormous legal and ethical quagmire, and Trump has left a giant gaping hole in the White House, both figurative and literally. But if you personally have a construction project that went horribly, horribly wrong, you're going to want a good lawyer. Luckily, I know a guy. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems, and they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front, and your lawyers only get paid if you do, to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.